Chapter 3 of Two Little Knights of Kentucky. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Rodriguez. Two Little Knights of Kentucky by Annie Fellows Johnston. Chapter 3 The Valentine Party. "Now we can tell Ginger about the bear," was Keith's first remark when he awoke early next morning. "But not until after we see the man again," answered Malcolm. "You know we promised him that." "Then let's go down before breakfast," exclaimed Keith, springing out of bed and beginning to dress himself. A little while later the old colored coachman saw them run past the window, where he was warming himself by the kitchen stove. "Daphne," he called out to the cook, who was beating biscuit in the adjoining pantry. "Daphne, what's dem children allers racing down to de spring house for in de snow? 'Pears like dey has a heap o' business down yondah." Daphne, who had just been coaxed into filling a basket with a generous supply of cold victuals, pretended not to hear until he repeated his question. Then she stopped pounding long enough to say sharply, "What for you always suspicion dem boys so everlastingly, Unc' Henry? Like enough dee's settin' a rabbit trap. Boys has done such things befo'. You's done it yo'self, hasn't you?" Daphne had seen them setting rabbit traps there, but she knew well enough that was not what they had gone for now, and that the food they carried was not for the game of Robinson Crusoe which they had played in the deserted cabin the summer before. Still, she did not care to take Unc' Henry into her confidence. The food, the warmth, and the night's rest had so restored the bear that it was able to go through all its performances for the boys' entertainment, although it limped badly. "Isn't he dandy?" cried Keith. "I wish we had one. It's nicer than any pets we ever had, except the ponies. Something always happens to the dogs, and the monkey was such a nuisance, and the white rabbits were stolen, and the guinea pigs died." "Haven't we had a lot of things, when you come to think of it?" exclaimed Malcolm. "Squirrels and white mice, and that coon that Uncle Harry bought us, and the parrot from Mexico." "Yes, and the goldfish, and the little baby alligator that froze to death in its tank," added Keith. "But a bear like this would be nicer than any of them. As soon as Papa comes home I'm going to ask him to buy us one." "Jonesy's nearly done for," said the tramp, pointing to the boy who lay curled up in the hay, coughing at nearly every breath. "We ought to stay here another day, if you young gentlemen don't mind." "Oh, goody!" cried Keith. "Then we can bring Ginger down to see the bear perform." "Yes," answered the man. "We'll give a free show to all your friends, if you will only kindly wait till to-morrow. Give us one more day to rest up and get in a little better trim. The poor beast's foot is still too lame for him to do his best, and you're too kind-hearted, I am sure, to want anything to suffer in order to give you pleasure." "Of course," answered both the boys, agreeing so quickly to all the man's smooth speeches that before they left the cabin they had renewed their promise to keep silent one more day. The man was a shrewd one, and knew well how to make these unsuspecting little souls serve his purpose like puppets tied to a string. Miss Allison was so busy with preparations for the party that she had no time all that day to notice what the boys were doing. When they came back from reciting their lessons to the minister, she sent them on several errands, but the rest of the time they divided between the cabin and the post office. Every mail brought a few valentines to each of them, but it was not until the 5 o'clock train came that they found the long-looked-for letters from their father and mother. "I knew they'd each send us a valentine," cried Keith, tearing both of his open. "I'll bet that Papa's is a comic one. Yes, here it is. Papa is such a tease. Isn't it a stunner? A baseball player. And whoopee, here's a dollar bill in each of 'em." "So there is in mine," said Malcolm. "Mamma says we are to buy anything we want and call it a valentine. They couldn't find anything down on the coast that they thought we would like." "I don't know what to get with mine," said Keith, folding his two bills together. "Seems to me I have everything I want except a camera, and I couldn't buy the kind I want for $2." They were halfway home when a happy thought came to Malcolm. "Keith," he cried excitedly, "if you would put your money with mine, that would make $4, and maybe it would be enough to buy the bear." "Let's do it!" exclaimed Keith, turning a handspring in the snow to show his delight. "Come on, we'll ask the man now." But the man shook his head when they dashed into the cabin and told their errand. "No, sonny, that ain't a tenth of what it's worth to me," he said. "I've raised that bear from the time it was a teeny cub. I've taught it and fed it and looked to it for company when I hadn't nobody in the world to care for me. Couldn't sell that bear for no such sum as that. Couldn't you raise any more money than that?" It was Malcolm's turn to shake his head. He turned away, too disappointed to trust himself to answer any other way. The tears sprang to Keith's eyes. He had set his heart on having that bear. "Never mind, brother," said Malcolm, moving towards the door. "Papa will get us one when he comes home and finds how much we want one." "Oh, don't be in such a hurry, young gentleman," whined the man, when he saw that they were really going. "I didn't say that I wouldn't sell it to you for that much. You've been so kind to me that I ought to be willing to make any sacrifice for you. I happen to need $4 very particular just now, and I've a mind to sell him to you on your own terms." He paused a moment, looking thoughtfully at a crack in the floor as he stood by the fire with his hands in his pockets. "Yes," he said at last, "you can have him for $4, if you'll keep mum about us being here for one more day. You can leave the bear here till we go." "No, no!" cried Keith, throwing his arms around the animal's neck. "He is ours now, and we must take him with us. We can hide him away in the barn. It is so dark outdoors now that nobody will see us. It wouldn't seem like he is really ours if we couldn't take him with us." After some grumbling, the man consented and pocketed the $4, first asking very particularly the exact spot in the barn where they expected to hide their huge pet. Unc' Henry, coming up from the carriage house through the twilight, thought he saw someone stealing along by the clump of cedars by the spring house. "Who's prowlin' round dis year's premises?" he called. There was no answer, and after peering intently through the dusk for a moment, the old darky concluded that he must have been mistaken, and passed on. As soon as he was gone, the boys came out from behind the cedars and crept up the snowy hillside. They were leading the bear between them. "We'll put him away back in the haymow, where he'll be warm and comfortable tonight," whispered Malcolm. "Then in the morning we can tell everybody." While they were busily scooping out a big hollow in the hay, they were startled by a rustling behind them. They looked into each other's frightened faces, and then glanced around the dark barn in alarm. An old cat pushed up through the hay, then a weak little cough betrayed Jonesy. He had followed them. "Shh!" he said in a warning whisper. "I'm afraid the boss will find out that I'm here. He started to the store for some tobacco as soon as you left. He's been wild for some, but didn't have no money. Don't you leave that bear out here tonight if you ever expect to see it again. That wasn't true what he told you. He never saw the bear till 2 months ago, and he sold it to you cheap because he's a-going to steal it back again tonight and make off up the road with it. He went off a-grinning over the slick way he'd fooled you, and I just had to come and tell, 'cause you've been so good to me. I'll never forget the little kid's giving me the coat off his own back, if I live to be 100. Now don't blab on me, or the boss would nearly kill me." "Is that man your father?" began Keith, but Jonesy, alarmed by some sudden noise, sprang to the door and disappeared in the twilight. The boys looked at each other for a moment, with surprise and indignation in their faces. There was a hurried consultation in the haymow. A few moments later, the boys were smuggling their new pet into the house and up the back stairs. They scarcely dared breathe until it was safe in their own room. All the time that they were dressing for the party, they were trying to decide where to put it for the night, so that neither the tramp nor the family could discover it. What Jonesy had told them about the man's dishonest intention did not relieve them from their promise. They were amazed that anyone could be so mean, and longed to tell their Aunt Allison all about it. Still, one of the conditions on which they had bought the bear was that they were to keep mum, and they stuck strictly to that promise. By the time they were dressed, they had decided to put it in the blue room, a guest chamber in the north wing, seldom used in winter because it was so hard to heat. "Nobody will ever think of coming in there," said Malcolm, "and it will be plenty warm for a bear if we turn on the furnace a little." As he spoke, he was tying the bear's rope around a leg of the big, high-posted bed. "Won't Ginger be surprised?" answered Keith. "We'll tell her that we have a Valentine 6 feet long and keep her guessing." There was no time for teasing, however, as the first guest arrived while they were still in the blue room. "I hate to go off and leave him in the dark," said Keith, with a final loving pat. "I guess he'll not mind, though. Maybe he'll think he's in the woods if I put this good-smelling pine pillow on the rug beside him." "Oh, boys," called Virginia from the hall downstairs, "see what an enormous Valentine pie Aunt Allison has made." Looking over the banisters, the boys saw that a table had been drawn into the middle of the wide reception hall, and on it sat the largest pie that they had ever seen. It was in a bright new tin pan, and its daintily browned crust would have made them hungry even if their appetites had not been sharpened by the cold and exercise of the afternoon. "What a queer place to serve pie," said Malcolm in a disapproving undertone to his brother. "Why don't they have it in the dining room? It looks mighty good, but somehow it doesn't seem proper to have it stuck out here in the hall. Mamma would never do such a thing." "Aw, it's made of paper. She's fooled us, sure, Malcolm," called back Keith, who had run on ahead to look. "It's only painted to look like a pie, but isn't it a splendid imitation?" Virginia, pleased to have caught them so cleverly, showed them the ends of 24 pieces of narrow ribbon peeping from under the delicately brown top crust. "The white ones are for the girls, and the red ones are for the boys," she explained. "There's a Valentine on the end of each one, and those on the red ribbons match the ones on the white. We'll all pull at once, and the ones who have Valentines alike will go out to dinner together." The guests came promptly. They had been invited for 6:30, and dinner was to be served soon after that time. The last to arrive was the Little Colonel. She came in charge of an old colored woman, Mom Beck, who had been her mother's nurse as well as her own. The child was so hidden in her wraps when Mom Beck led her upstairs that no one could tell how she looked. The boys had been curious to see her ever since they had heard so many tales of her mischievous pranks. A few minutes later, when she appeared in the parlors, there was a buzz of admiration. Maybe it was not so much for the soft light hair, the star-like beauty of her big dark eyes, or the delicate color in her cheeks that made them as pink as a wild rose, as it was for the Valentine costume she wore. It was of dainty white tulle, sprinkled with hundreds of tiny red velvet hearts, and there was a coronet of glittering rhinestones on her long fair hair. "The Queen of Hearts," announced Aunt Allison, leading her forward. "You know she's made some tarts upon a summer day, and now she shall open the Valentine pie and see if it is as good as Her Majesty's." The big music box in the hall began playing one of its liveliest waltzes. The children gathered around the great pie, and 24 little hands reached out to grasp the floating ends of ribbon. "Pull!" cried the little Queen of Hearts. The paper crust flew off, and 24 yards of ribbon, each with a Valentine attached, fluttered brightly through the air for an instant. "Now match your verses," cried Her Majesty again, opening her own to read what was in it. There was much laughter and peeping over shoulders, and tangling of white and scarlet ribbons, while the gay music box played on. In the midst of it, Virginia beckoned to the Little Colonel. "Come upstairs with me for a minute, Lloyd," she whispered, "and help me look for something. Aunt Allison has forgotten where she put the box of arrows that we are to use in the archery contest after dinner. There is the prettiest prize for the one who hits the red heart in the center of the target." "Oh, do you suppose you can hit it?" asked Lloyd, as she and Virginia slipped their arms around each other and went skipping up the stairs. "Yes, indeed," answered Virginia. "I used to practice so much with my Indian bow and arrow out at the fort that I could hit center nearly every time. I am not going to shoot to-night. Aunt Allison thinks it wouldn't be fair." When they reached the top of the stairs, Virginia went into her room to light a wax taper in one of the tall silver candlesticks on her dressing table. "I think that Aunt Allison must have left those arrows in the blue room," she said, leading the way down the cross hall which went to the north wing. "She made the pie in there this morning, and all the other things were there. Nobody comes over in this part of the house much in winter unless there happens to be a great deal of company." The taper that Virginia carried was the only light in that part of the house. When she reached the door of the blue room, she turned to Lloyd. "Hold the candle for me, please," she said, "while I look in the closet." It was a pretty picture that the little Queen of Hearts made as she stood in the doorway with the tall silver candlestick held high in both hands. Her hair shone like gold in the candlelight, and her glittering crown flashed as if a circle of fairy fireflies had been caught in its soft meshes. Her dark eyes peered anxiously around the big shadowy room, lighted only by her flickering taper. Downstairs, Malcolm and Keith were almost quarreling about her. It began by Malcolm taking his brother aside and offering to trade valentines with him. "Why?" asked Keith suspiciously. "'Cause yours matches the Little Colonel's, and I want to take her out to dinner," admitted Malcolm. "She is the prettiest girl here." "But I don't want to trade," answered Keith. "I want to take her myself." "I'll give you the pick of any 6 stamps in my album if you will." "Don't want your old stamps," declared Keith stoutly. "I'd rather have the Little Colonel for my partner." "I think you might trade," coaxed Malcolm. "It's mean not to when I'm the oldest. I'll give you that Chinese puzzle you've been wanting so long, if you will." Keith shook his head. Just then a terrific scream sounded in the upper hall, followed by another that made everyone downstairs turn pale with fright. 2 voices were uttering piercing shrieks, one after another, so loud and frantic that even the servants in the back part of the house came running. Miss Allison, thinking of the candles she had told Virginia to light, and remembering the thin white dress the child wore, instantly thought she must have set herself afire. She ran into the hall, so frightened that she was trembling from head to foot. Before she could reach the staircase, Virginia came flying down the steps, white as a little ghost, and her eyes wide with terror. Throwing herself into her aunt's outstretched arms, she began to sob out her story between great trembling gasps. "Oh, there's an awful, awful wild beast in the blue room, nearly as tall as the ceiling. It rose up and came after us out of the corner, and if I hadn't slammed the door just in time, it would have eaten us up. I'm sure it would. Oh, 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 it was so awful," she wailed. "Why, Virginia!" exclaimed her aunt, distressed to see her so terrified. "It must have only been a big shadow you saw. It isn't possible for a wild beast to be in the blue room, you know. Where is Lloyd?" "She's up here, Miss Allison," called Mom Beck's voice. "She's so skeered, I's powerful afraid she's goin' to faint. They sut'nly is something in that room, honey, 'deed they is. I can hear it moving around now, switching his tail and growling." Malcolm and Keith, with guilty faces, went dashing up the stairs, and the whole party followed them at a respectful distance. When they opened the door, the room looked very big and shadowy, and the bear, roused from its nap, was standing on its hind legs beside the high-posted bed. The huge figure was certainly enough to frighten anyone coming upon it unexpectedly in the dark, and when Miss Allison saw it, she drew Virginia's trembling hand into hers with a sympathetic clasp. Before she could ask any questions, the boys began an excited explanation. It was some time before they could make their story understood. Their grandmother was horrified, and insisted on sending the animal away at once. "The idea of bringing such a dangerous creature into anyone's house!" she exclaimed. "And above all, shutting him up in a bedroom! We might have all been bitten or hugged to death." "But, grandmother," begged Malcolm, "he isn't dangerous. Let me bring him into the light and show you what a kind old pet he is." There was a scattering to the other end of the hall as Malcolm came out, leading the bear, but the children gradually drew nearer as the great animal began its performances. Keith whistled and kept time with his feet in a funny little shuffling jig he had learned from Jonesy, and the bear obligingly went through all his tricks. He was used to being pulled out to perform whenever a crowd could be collected. Virginia forgot her fear of him when he stood up and presented arms like a real soldier, and even went up and patted him when the show was over, joining with the boys in begging that he might be allowed to stay in the house until morning. Mrs. McIntyre was determined to send a man down to the cabin at once to investigate. She had a horror of tramps, but the boys begged her to wait until daylight for Jonesy's sake. "The man will beat him if he finds out that Jonesy warned us," pleaded Keith. He was so earnest that the tears stood in his big, trustful eyes. "This is spoiling the party, Mother," whispered Miss Allison, "and dinner is waiting. I'll be responsible for any harm that may be done if you will let the boys have their way this once." There seemed no other way to settle it just then, so Bruin was allowed to go back to his rug in the blue room, and the door was securely locked. Keith took Lloyd down to dinner, and his grandmother heard him apologizing all the way down for having frightened her. The little Queen of Hearts listened smilingly, but her color did not come back all evening until after the archery contest. It was when Malcolm came up with the prize he had won, a tiny silver arrow, and pinned it in the knot of red ribbon on her shoulder. "Will you keep it to remember me by?" he asked bashfully. "Of course," she answered, with a smile that showed all her roguish dimples. "I'll keep it for ever and ever, to remember how near I came to being eaten up by your bear." "It seems too bad for such a beautiful party to come to an end," Sally Fairfax said, when the last merry game was played, the last story told, and it was time to go home. "But there's one comfort," she added, gathering all her gay valentines together. "There needn't be any end to the remembering of it. I've had such a good time, Mrs. McIntyre." It was so late when the last carriage rolled down the avenue, bearing away the last smiling little guest, that the children were almost too sleepy to undress. It was not long until the last light was put out in every room, and a deep stillness settled over the entire house. One by one the lights went out in every home in the valley, and only the stars were left shining in the cold wintry sky. No, there was one lamp that still burned. It was in the little cottage where old Professor Heinrich sat, bowed over his books. End of Chapter 3. Recording by Christine Rodriguez, Milford, Connecticut.